We will begin the complete restoration of America and the revolution of common sense. It's all about common sense. First, I will declare a national emergency at our southern border.
Did he need to say that the Biden administration were a radical and corrupt establishment, or was that going, in fairness, going a little bit too far? He's already won it. He's about to be president again for a second time. He doesn't need to stoop to that level.
I really think President Trump's speaking for America right now. I mean, how disappointing for Joe Biden to pardon his family and all those people preemptively before he walked out of the White House today. You know, I know people who know Laken Riley's family in Athens, Georgia, who was killed by an illegal alien, murdered, brutally murdered. I know friends who've lost family members to fentanyl poisoning because of the border. I have friends in Israel who still have family members and friends in Gaza. So when he talks about this litany of messes, I have friends who are still affected by Hurricane Helene in Western North Carolina, and FEMA can't get them help. I have friends in Los Angeles who we watched the failures of LA County and the governor of California. And for Trump to sum it up that succinctly is pretty special. I don't think he's really speaking for himself at all. I think he's speaking for America. Like I said, I've had Uber drivers, hotel clerks, people on airlines, and people in the elevator at hotels, all my travel in the last few weeks that acknowledge this country's in a mess. And it comes from bad policies. People are connecting the dots. You know, are you surprised? Am I surprised that he went down that list? No, because that's what America voted for. People voted overwhelmingly for Donald Trump to take the reins and to fix these situations that they see. And I think he's ready to get to work to do it.
He's also said that he's going to scrap the so-called Green New Deal. That's this sort of series of Biden administration directives, regulations, programs that were aimed at boosting green jobs, encouraging, green businesses to come and set up in the United States, regulating the fossil fuel industry, limiting pollution. And a lot of what he says on climate and energy really appeals to a certain crowd. They think, yes, we do want to get our energy bills down. Of course, we want any restrictions on new oil and gas released immediately, fine. But with the same hand, he is also going to cut huge swathes of industry and business sort of working behind the scenes, isn't he?
Well, not really. I mean, a lot of what you were talking about there are also mandates that are going to be eliminated with the Green New Deal. One of the mandates was this forced march towards electrification of automobiles. While that in and of itself is probably inevitable and going to happen, there are large areas of the United States in which it's just not practical to have an electric vehicle because there aren't charging stations. I'm using this as one example. And the Biden administration was forcing folks to do that and get rid of the internal combustion engine. So I think what you're seeing is a more realistic, and as the president said, a common sense approach to the environment and to several of these regulations that were imposed by those who thought they knew better in Washington, D.C.
He's also said today he's going to issue an order to form the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE. This is the new advisory body aimed at cutting government costs, expected to be co-led by Elon Musk. But we've just heard this afternoon that department will be subject to legal action as soon as it's sort of written into law.
Well, that's the great thing about America. We when we're in opposition, I guess we like to file lawsuits. So yes, there is a group of folks that filed a restraining order, so to speak, on Doge. And, Doge is being led by someone I'm sure you've never heard of in the UK, Elon Musk. But part of the goal here really is to go agency by agency and figure out what fat can be cut. We've had this in past periods in the United States before. The Simpson-Bowles Commission was one that was set up by Congress about 20 years ago, basically with the same mandate. Go through each agency and find out where there's inefficiency in spending. So that is what they're charged with. The other part is efficiency. We live in a brand new world, or a changing world, with technology, with AI, and how does that help government efficiency? So that'll all be under the mandate of DOGE.
Yeah, look, he spoke a little earlier just said this is what victory feels like. This is Donald Trump. This is Elon Musk addressing Trump supporters at the Capital One Arena. He's basically vowed to take his Department of Government Efficiency, Doge, to Mars. He said, which is sort of maybe a bit of a mix of policy, don't know. But look, governments around the world are going to be watching what Donald Trump does and Elon Musk does with Doge as an interesting exercise in government efficiency. It's a big problem for many governments around the world, including our own.
Probably every government, especially democratic
exactly that.
government.
Exactly that. Look, really good to speak to you, Michael Dubke, who's a former White House Director of Communications to Donald Trump. Really good to speak to you. Thank you for being with us.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's go to seek a Democrat opinion now. Of course, at the end of Joe Biden's presidency today, what will his legacy be and what does the Democrat Party do next? Well, Mo Vela is a former senior advisor to Biden and his former Director of Communications while he was vice president. Mo, thanks for being with us.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Look, there's no nice way to say it. Donald Trump absolutely laid into Joe Biden and the previous administration during the first, third of his inaugural address today. And Joe Biden had to, politely sit through the whole thing. The only time he stood up and clapped was when mention of the Gaza ceasefire was made. Pretty humiliating for Joe Biden, do you think, or will he have expected that?
Honestly, it could be viewed as humiliating for President Biden. But to be honest with you, it's unfortunate that Mr. Trump, used that speech to do that when I was hoping he would take the high road, be positive and optimistic and hopeful and talk about what he plans to do, right? And so you don't need to bring another human being down in order to raise yourself or your purpose up. So look, I doubt President Biden was humiliated. I'm sure he's frustrated that people, will for a while maybe not give him the due credit that he deserves for some of his accomplishments, including today. But I think it's par for the course. He's been in the business for over 50 years. He knows how it works.
Okay, all right. Let's talk briefly on what we know that Joe Biden's going to do now. Will he just be spending time with his family? He's a pretty old guy. I'm sure he would appreciate a rest, a good break, as all of us would in his position. But do we know if there's anything immediate on the agenda for Joe Biden? What do you expect him to do next?
I'm not aware of any specifics, but what I would expect is that he will be much in the form of Jimmy Carter in the years he has left, and I hope there are many. I think you'll see him be more of an elder statesman. I think you're going to see him remain active, and from an opinion perspective and a thought leader on the issues that have mattered to him and the issues that he believes are crucial for the future of our democracy and our country and the world. So that's what I would expect. I also expect he will spend time with his family. He, again, whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, or a Libertarian, whether you're green, yellow, pink, black, or white, it doesn't matter if you're a red state or a blue state or from the UK, Germany, France, or China. The one thing we all do owe Mr. Biden is gratitude, frankly. Again, you don't have to agree with him. You don't even have to like him, but he did dedicate his entire adult life to our nation and to democracy and to international relations. And for that, we should be grateful.
Mo, and do you remember, was it in 2016 when there were comparisons about the size of Donald Trump's crowd for his inauguration speech and the size of Barack Obama's crowd?
And indeed, one theory as to why one theory is that he was happy to hold it inside the Capitol building simply because then those kind of comparisons could not be made.
Interesting.
But on the other hand, it is blooming cold in Washington today.
There were in 2016 kind of embarrassingly few people there for Donald Trump compared to Barack Obama. But there were all sorts of accusations. Exactly, there were. I should back that up. All sorts of accusations about how those photos were doctored and it was a load of odd nonsense, etc. 2020, Joe Biden, of course, was very different because we'd had January the 6th and security concerns and obviously post-COVID as well. well. So Michael Crick with us here in the studio. Greg Swenson, chair of Republican Overseas, is in Washington, D.C. for us at the moment. Will Pavia, US correspondent for The Times, who's been at the event that President Trump has been. Oh, he hasn't been at the event. He is at Capitol One, the Capital One arena, where Donald Trump will give his sort of first official. Well, what's he doing? He's sort of basically addressing the crowds for the first time massively. So he's given his inaugural address earlier, which we've been hearing sound bites from, but he's going to address the masses at the Capital One arena. Should we go to Will and just say hello and get a sense for how that event is building up? Will, good evening.
Good evening.
I hear that people were queuing outside that building to get in. There's many less expected there, of course, because it's got a much smaller capacity than would fit along Pennsylvania Avenue in the traditional parade that's been scrapped because of the weather. But I hear people have been queuing there since 3 a.m. in the morning to be able to get their space.
That's very true, and I was one of them. I mean, not from 3, but I got there at about 5:30, and it was a queue that stretched down 2 streets, went round a corner to the Capitol Arena, and we were sort of being herded through these to try and keep the queue in order. They sort of put these barricades, so you sort of went. It was like being in a massive airport security sort of system. A lot of people were saying that they felt they now knew how cattle felt. And the previous day, there'd been a sort of arena rally that Trump had appeared at, and lots of people didn't get in, and a lot of people were very cross about that. There was apparently chaos with the queuing system, and it sort of was all left to sort of go to shambles. So anyway, so people queued up for hours and hours this morning. It was about -6 degrees Celsius, very cold, and 20,000 got in, and as people realized they were going to get in, they started to get less shouty with each other and get rather celebratory.
So what's it like there now? All of the 20,000 people are in.
They are, yes. They've stopped letting people in, and so the first thing that happened is everyone sort of filed in, and on these big screens above the arena, they play a strange kind of almost like split screen between what you were seeing on the screen, which was this very sort of, quite sort of dignified and stately kind of ceremony, and everyone dressed up to the nines, and sort of, tech tycoons and members of Congress and former presidents. And then in the arena, you had all these people who'd been queuing up since the early hours of the morning and were sort of a little bit ragged, I would say, and were sort of cheering. They were booing but when Barack Obama appeared, and cheering when J.D. Vance and Elon Musk appeared on the screen. And so they sort of followed that ceremony in a slightly more kind of raucous fashion. And of course, we eventually saw Trump give his inaugural address. I would say that some of the biggest cheers here were for things like when he said he was going to rename the Gulf of Mexico. There's a lot of cheering for that, and also a lot of cheering for his saying that there's going to be a policy of only 2 genders. The Gulf of America, yeah. And the others, but occasionally there were moments of like laughter at the theater of it, like when Biden was, you could see Biden at some point. You could see Biden just behind Trump, seeming to almost have his head in one hand, and there was laughter at that. And the other moment was when Trump said that he was going to plant an American flag on Mars, and Elon Musk, who sort of stood beside Barron Trump, kind of gives these 2 thumbs up. That got a lot of laughter and cheers, like, yeah, let's do it, kind of in the stadium.
Well, I think we've got those clips, actually, Will. So let's bring everyone an idea of what you've just been talking about. So should we talk about Mars, the American flag on Mars?
The United States will once again consider itself a growing nation, one that increases our wealth, expands our territory, builds our cities, raises our expectations, and carries our flag into new and beautiful horizons. And we will pursue our manifest destiny into the stars, launching American astronauts to plant the stars and stripes on the planet Mars.
I can totally imagine, Will, why the crowds absolutely loved that.
On the other hand, it was not delivered in the sort of Kennedy-esque way. He might as well have been announcing, and I'm going to go down to the shops and buy some eggs. There was no oomph to the delivery, and that's true of the whole speech, really. But I mean, on the other hand, no doubt his supporters loved it. I mean, one of the interesting things about the inauguration, I mean, I was there for the inauguration in '89 of George Bush Senior. And that was a very opulent occasion, a lot of money around. But of course, that was the old Republican Party. I imagine today is a rather different crowd of people.
Will.
Yes, I think that's right. I mean, you still have the sort of donors and people that are on the floor. So basically the stadium is carpeted red. So a huge red floor, glows with there's red lights above it, all the red hats in the audience, and you have the sort of boxes and whatnot. But I would say the rest of the people that are in this stadium. I mean, I interviewed a bus driver. I interviewed the manager of a cemetery. I mean, small time entrepreneurs and people like that who sort of come from all over, and cattle farmers, and people who've come from the Midwest. So it's a pretty varied mix of people, and I would say their enthusiasm for Trump is sort of somewhat unprecedented in terms of if you compared that to a previous Republican leader, I would think.
Yeah. Will, just tell us about what we expect to get at that Capital One Arena. Your line's a little bit shaky. We should let our listeners know that that's just because, Will is in this huge arena. There's about 20,000 people there. So, of course, everyone's struggling for signal, but we seem to be just about okay. What are we expecting? So it kicks off at 8:30 our time. So in about 45 minutes' time, there's a desk on the stage, Will, and those executive orders will be signed live in front of that audience of celebrating fans.
Yes, it's a rather odd setup, the stage. The stage is a big stage at one end of the floor of the arena, and the back part of the stage has these 3 tiers of sort of white armchairs. So presumably he'll have members of his cabinet and family behind him on these armchairs. And then you have this podium where we already have the warm-up acts now. So we've had people like Charlie Kirk and, some supportive congressmen, and Kellyanne Conway spoke. She said something along the lines of, most people say the sequel's not as good, but this sequel's going to be better. I think she said this sequel's going to be kick-ass. Anyway, and so then to the right of this, or sorry, to the left as you look at the stage of this podium, you've got this tiny little wooden table where apparently he's going to sit and sign. So it's going to be a strange ceremony as far as we can tell.